Many players will do what it takes to win a match of Yu-Gi-Oh! Add extra engines in the decks, even if they brick, use cards that need dice rolls to activate something, or even play Runick Stun and act like they're lovable people. What we won't risk is doing a coin flip, let alone a deck that is filled with coin flipped effects. Such is the story of the infamously known GX deck, Arcana Force. The entire deck was based around light fairy monsters with coin flip effects that vary depending on your result. Some of them were neat, and some of them, well, weren't. What this deck was perfect for was creating chaos like Sartorious, or people with severe gambling problems. What it wasn't suitable for was any kind of competitive play, as we'll show you in today's video. The Arcana Force would make their flippy arrival Light of Destruction on May 13th, 2008. A majority of the archetype was in the set, with 13 cards appearing. 10 monsters, 1 spell, and 2 trap cards would be the reward. Starting, we have Arcana Force 0, the Fool. This level 1 fairy with 0 attack and defense couldn't be destroyed by battle, and couldn't be switched to defense position. When summoned, you toss a coin and apply the proper effect based on the result. If heads, negate the effects of cards you control that target this monster and destroy them. If it's tails, negate the effects of cards your opponent controls that target this monster and destroy it. This is how every Arcana Force monster operates. They have a trigger summon effect to flip a coin on all of them, and you never know what you're going to get, as the Fool clearly shows. A monster that couldn't be destroyed by battle but needed to be left in attack position so you could feel it punched in the face doesn't scream as a card you should run. The choices from the coin flip weren't really anything significant either. You had a 50% chance of making this card non-targetable by your opponent if you got tails. Seeing this card already suggests that this deck is not that easy to play. Nothing is more stressful than cards than having to hope for a good result. Now let's do this 9 more times with the rest of the Arcana Force family. Because they only get worse from here, because at least the Fool could be set face down and be a battle immune monster, which was still a good effect in 2008.
Thank goodness it worked. Quick, we don't have time. I'm a blue version of you from the future and I need your help.
Oh, hey. Do you like food?
We don't have time for this. The very timeline is in danger.
Do you like food but hate cooking?
Why, yes, I do.
Did you know that you can get chef-prepared meals on the table in 2 minutes with factors ready to eat meals, so you can get back to doing what you love this spring?
That sounds too good to be true.
When things get hectic, Factor is flexible. Change your order up every week with plans from 4 to 18 meals per week, or pause or reschedule your deliveries anytime.
Wait, is this an ad? Are you using this once-in-a-lifetime experience to tell me about fast food?
Factor now offers loads of snack options like breakfast, smoothies, juices, small bites, and more to keep me going no matter what's on the schedule.
Oh no, the connection's unstable. We've wasted too much time.
Thanks to Factor75 for sponsoring today's video. Use my link to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. Arcana Force 1, the Magician, was level 4 with 1100 attack and defense, and when summoned, you toss a coin. If heads, its attack is doubled until the end of the turn when your opponent activates a spell card. If tails, your opponent gains 500 life points if they activate a spell card. Arcana Force 3, the Empress, was another level 4 with 1300 attack and defense. And when you flip a coin on its summon, you can special summon an Arcana Force monster from your hand if your opponent normal summons such a monster if it's heads. If it's tails, send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard if your opponent normal summons a monster. Arcana Force 4, the Emperor, was level 4 with 1400 attack and defense. All Arcana Force monsters gain 500 attack when its coin result is heads. If tails, they lose 500 attack instead. Arcana Force 6, the Lovers, was another level 4 with 1600 attack and defense. If heads, you can use it as 2 attributes for an Arcana Force monster. If tails, neither player can tribute summon Arcana Force monsters. Arcana Force 7, the Chariot, was 1700 attack and defense. If heads, you can special summon a monster destroys by battle to your side of the field. If tails, you give control of this card to your opponent. You have Arcana Force 14 Temperance and Arcana Force 18 the Moon for their high-level monsters. Temperance had a quick effect that allowed you to discard a card to prevent you from taking battle damage from a battle you just had. On summon, toss a coin, and if heads, you have all battle damage you take. If tails, have all battle damage your opponent takes. The Moon is level 7, and when summoned, toss a coin. If heads, you can special summon a Moon token once per turn during your standby phase. If tails, target 1 monster you control and give it to your opponent during the end phase. To continue the high-level monsters, Arcana Force 21, the World, was a level 8 monster with 3100 attack and defense. If summoned, toss a coin, and if heads, you can send 2 monsters you control to the graveyard to skip your opponent's turn during the end phase once per turn. If tails, however, you add the top card of your opponent's graveyard to their hand once per turn. Finally, for boss monsters, they had Arcana Force EX, the Dark Ruler, and Arcana Force EX, the Light Ruler. Both couldn't be normal summoner set and must be special summoned from your hand by sending 3 monsters to the graveyard. Toss a coin and apply the following effect. For Dark Ruler, if heads, it can attack once again in a row during the battle phase. And if it does so by this effect, it's changed its defense position and it cannot change its battle position until the end of the next turn. If tails, destroy all monsters on the field if it's destroyed. For Light Ruler, if it's heads, target one card in your graveyard and add it to your hand when this card destroys your opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard. If tails, you can negate the activation of a spell or trap card or monster effect that targets this card and destroy it by having this card lose 1000 attack. Out of all the Arcana Force monsters, it's nice to know the boss monster's effects aren't abysmal if you're getting either heads or tails. At best, the Dark Ruler can give you a sweeper in battle or a nuke, and the Light Ruler can negate things that target it or recycle cards from your graveyard. However, they didn't have protection from non-targeting destruction or removal like how the boss monsters of today have it literally built in. That made it more deterring to run these monsters, as you essentially go -30 special summon a big boss with nothing and with no protection. The rulers were basically too costly to summon and too risky to play. At the very least, they didn't require your normal summon to be brought out though. Nonetheless, to say a lot is going with the Arcana monsters is an understatement. Effects can range from a minor attack increase from Emperor to continuous effects that special summon monsters like Empress. The same is true for the negative effects they carry. You can suddenly find yourself unable to tribute summon your Arcana Force monsters, giving your opponent their cards back from their grave, or straight up handing them your monsters. This brings us to our first problem, if you couldn't tell. The deck depended on coin toss effects, which made them too random and too inconsistent to count on. Requiring every monster needing a coin flip to succeed in your favor is reliable as thinking everyone showers at regionals. You have no control over the results that happen, and you're at the whim of destiny. Unless you're Sartorious himself and have the power to do so, the monsters completely take the game out of your hands outside of playing them, and rely on luck that you would get an effect that wouldn't screw your game over. The other issue that came into play is that this made it hard to set up a game style. You had no control over your board setup except by choosing a monster to summon. Since you can't decide which effect to use, you don't have any control over combos or responses to your opponent's plays with your Arcana Force monsters due to their inconsistency. Lastly, the deck was slow. On top of the random effects, no search cards were given to the archetype on release, and you had to rely on drawing power outside of the archetype like Reckless Greed to dig through your deck. The deck barely had any means of special summoning as well. Empress can potentially give you unlimited special summons, but that's if you got the coin flip correct. There were also cards like Valhalla, Hall of the Fallen that let you special summon a level 4 fairy from your hand, but you needed to control no monsters to use it. It also was searchable with Archetypes, however that wasn't enough to make bringing out your rulers easy, as they needed 3 monsters to send to the graveyard to summon. The deck was stuck constantly with normal summoning monsters while trying to avoid countless traps that could quickly stagnate your plays. That's not going to cut it in a deck that needs, well, anything to get going. What the archetype needed was a card that could increase its consistency. That request was met with half-hearted results. Light Barrier was their field spell that lets you choose what coin flip effect you want to apply to your Arcana Force monsters when they're summoned, and gives you life points when an Arcana Force monster destroys a monster by battle, equal to that monster's attack power. If this sounds too good to be true, you are an experienced Yu-Gi-Oh player. The card came with the demand of having you flip a coin to get this effect during your standby phase. If it's tails, the applied effect is negated until the end of your next standby phase. Nothing makes a card necessary to a bad deck terrible like using the same gimmick to it. On top of the fact that you keep flipping a coin to get this condition, hopefully you'd wait until the standby phase to take a chance. No escaping the destiny of flipping a chord at the table to even get the effect that could make Arcana Force stomachable. Arcana Call is the first trap card that selects an Arcana Force monster you control and removes one Arcana Force monster from either player's graveyard. Until the end phase of your turn, that monster's effect becomes the same as the removed monster's effect for the same coin toss. The second trap is Reversal of Fate. If the name didn't give it away, this card lets you target one Arcana Force monster and treat its effect as the opposite coin toss. Arcana Call needs way too much to be utilized. Not only did you need an Arcana Force monster in your graveyard, but you also needed one with an effect that benefited you based on the monster's coin flip. Reversal of Fate was about as decent as it gets, as it at least lets you change your result to something you desired. The only good thing you can say about these cards is that you didn't have to flip a coin to get their effects. However, that's not enough to get through the fact that this archetype was too gimmicky to see good results. A deck with too many various effects, no searchers, and no way to control gameplay is destined for disaster. So, as expected, no one picked up this deck on release. The inconsistencies were too much of a turnoff for anyone to play except for a fun time. The meta was too strong for this deck to have any chance, with contenders like Lightsworns, who hilariously also came from the same set, and Gladbeasts. All these decks had better game plans than the Arcana Force combinations of Light Barrier plus Arcana Force Monster, and Rage and a coin toss giving you the desired result. But if it makes the Arcana Force users happy, one card saw a tad bit of play. Surprisingly, the Fool was used in a few top deck lists as it was simply a card that couldn't be destroyed by battle and could stall while you got your pieces. Decks like Counter Fairy also utilized it and melded it with their other fairy support, such as Herald of Orange Light, discarding the target, and an honest target because it was a light monster. So no pitying the Fool. You could pity the rest of the deck as it hadn't seen play for over 16 years. It didn't get support for over 12 years until a random card was given to it in Phantom Rage in 2020. Arcana Reading was a normal spell card that you need to toss a coin to apply an effect unless you controlled Light Barrier. In that case, you get to choose the effect without flipping a coin. The Heads effects lets you add a card with a coin toss in effect from your deck to your hand. If Tails, your opponent gets to add a card from their deck to their hand. It also had an effect that allowed you to banish this card from your graveyard to immediately normal summon an Arcana Force monster from your hand. Even with their Searcher, the deck got worse because of it. Not only was its search effect way too risky, but it now made Light Barrier, which was just as gimmicky, necessary to play. Outside the fact that Reading lets you normal summon additional monsters to set up your summoning for your boss monsters, that setup will still be too slow. It will take your next turn to at least summon an 8 or higher. By then, your opponent could just clear your board easily since Archetypes had no protection or spell trap support that interacts with your opponent's plays. Not as if you had to just worry about your opponent screwing up your plans when this deck can maim itself without any help. To finally end the pain of our Coinstar loving archetype, Arcana Force 15, the Fiend, was a level 7 fairy with 2500 attack and defense. This card could be discarded and add a Light Barrier from your deck or graveyard to hand. And of course, it has your mandatory on-summon coin flip effects. If Heads, you can target one monster in the field, destroy it, and inflict finder damage to the controller when this card declares an attack. If Tails, destroy all monsters in the field if an attack is declared involving this card. Not many Arcana Force monsters have effects that seem beneficial, whether it's the Heads or Tails effects. The Fiend is one of those cards you can include with EX Light Ruler and EX Dark Ruler as cards that give decent effects for either result. It even fetches a Light Barrier from your hand or graveyard, giving you easy access to the card. Unfortunately, the card is hindered by being a level 7 without an inherable special summoning effect, making this card hard to summon in a deck with very few ways to get extra bodies on board. The deck can barely manage to get cards like Dark Ruler and Light Ruler that need 3 monsters sent to the grave, so it's safe to assume they would struggle to get a simple tribute summon setup for this card. In conclusion, the best way this card can be used is to search for a Light Barrier and eat an Ash for its trouble. That's the note this deck ended on, and it seems like the final coin flip for this deck. Many would say that all the deck needs is more support to make it playable, but that doesn't seem likely. Konami seems hell-bent on ensuring that this Archetypes have players bet on a coin flip. Sadly, that's already the impending doom the deck will have to live with. The gimmicky process hinders consistency and does more harm than good. Yu-Gi-Oh! Player decks usually give players a style that'll set up their board manually, or even have a clear-cut direction that players can just run on autopilot without having to do much. Arcana Force offers neither. You're at the whims of probability, a coin, and chaos. You have no direction of how things will go, and it feels like a deck that removes the player completely. Let's add to the fact that this deck is really easy to interrupt and stop, whether it be hand traps, monster effects, spells, or traps. A sneeze from your opponent can also interrupt your destiny and outcome. It's fair to say that this deck should be forgotten in time. It's just not worth the effort of building and flipping a coin 64 times and raging that it only gives the result you want 2 times. So, would any support really help this deck? Probably not. Not only would the deck still need to have an insane amount of support to make it better, but it'll also just need to be able to combat even the simplest of decks, whether rogue, meta, or even just plain casual. There doesn't really seem to be a way to make a coin flip card that sticks to the gimmick like the Arcana Force does, and not punish the player, and overall be an actual sound card. The closest they've seemed to get to that is by most likely using Light Barrier as a catalyst for new support, like how Arcana Reading does, which allows the player to choose the effect if they control Light Barrier. You just have the unfortunate situation of Light Barrier being the string holding the deck together. Isn't that better than the latter, with the constantly flipping of coins, crossing your fingers, and sweating profusely as the effect ends up making you discard cards from your hand, give your opponent life points, make you go back 3 spaces, or whatever Arcana Force forces you to do? At the end of the day, we can all agree that the deck is bad and just recognize that Sartorious is one of the most creepy drawn human beings in all of GX. Just play Yubel and enjoy your time. It's time to let Arcana Force rest forever in the GX era and flip its way into oblivion.